Thanks for joining the channel here over at SubStars. So could Clerks be made today? No, but it should be. Clerks was made in 1994. Perhaps you've heard of it. I can't imagine anyone. I just assume everyone has seen everything that I've seen. One obvious issue would be with this current political correctness kerfluffle we're going through right now, which you could just get over if you just said screw it and went ahead and told the pussies to just suck your balls. There's kind of passive political correctness issues, and then there's active political correctness. And with a movie like this, it's mostly passively politically incorrect. There's nonsense issues with the left about the Bechdel test, which even Kevin Smith made fun of in one of his movies, about having women speak or POCs that have to be Mary Sue's and that kind of stuff. I don't think there's a lot of active issues in this. And the way to get around that is you just start out as offensive as possible and you never let up. Open up with Catholic priest jokes, but then once they've accepted that, the way to get this is how you get the moral high ground, by giving them something that they want to find funny, they want to lampoon, and Catholic priests or blonde people is totally safe. And then after that, after you've kind of inserted your leverage, then you immediately go after rabbis and blacks and gays and whatever. You just nuke everyone from orbit, and then you make fun of the pussy virtue signaling slacktivists who pretend to get outraged about something until they get distracted by a shiny object. Plus, now you can go after Indians for the bonus. They seem to have a great sense of humor. So with an unpolitically correct movie, you want to overwhelm them so that they'd be complaining about so many parts of the movie, it would just be ridiculous. In fact, now that I think about it, there could be a great movie and just going after all like this current affairs stuff, this virtue signaling SJWs, especially with the trans stuff, which is totally real and not a social contagion. Doesn't it seem odd that nobody is making at least low-budget movies that are nuking SJWs from orbit? It's just a woke black hole, and there's so much material out there. A parody of the trans movement would be, oh, God, that would be amazing. I would love to write for that. But I guess the distribution of that would be a wee bit of a problem. So the main reason they couldn't make Clerks today is because 94 was sort of the last clear working configuration before 9/11, and America is a shithole now, where Clerks, the movie, doesn't make sense. And who are the bad guys in the original? What are they up against? It's sort of the guy's anxiety about their relationships and that they didn't know what they're doing in life, which was kind of a theme for the early 90s. The difference is, while 94 was already a terminal state for the country because of things, forces that have been set in motion 50 years before that, these guys, the characters in the film, had good odds of figuring things out and doing what they did. I think in the second film was they borrowed from the drug dealers, Jay and Bob, and they bought the shop and they go into their own business. But in current year, when you factor in inflation, the country is in a dark place. And it was bad in 94. Plus, let's assume the characters are supposed to be about 20 in this. So they would have been born in 94, and if you assume their parents were 20 years before them, just to make the math easier and so on, you look at the economic environment, the different generations they were born into, and the power of the dollar, which is really the power of an hour of labor. And the truth is shocking. That hour of labor today is worth a fraction of what it was worth in 74 or obviously 54, and inflation was bad then. And by 94, people were starting to feel hopeless, and depression was setting in in the country as people were kind of understanding that every year was going to get worse. They kind of knew that it had peaked somewhere in the 40s and 50s, and that they would never have the buying power of their grandparents. And in current year, I can't imagine what a modern Clerks would joke about, because nothing is really funny when the country actually sucks. They had a paradise. It seemed like a golden goose, and they destroyed it in the 60s by many of the things they did in the 60s. Even mall rats wouldn't be possible because malls are gone now. Now people are more shut in as social cohesion is destroyed, and they order things from various. Amazon is just one of them, and they have these things delivered to their house. But I think I was thinking about this yesterday and I thought like, oh, is that a bad thing? And then I caught myself and go, oh, if it's happening, it's almost certainly a bad thing. That's the assumption you can just start with. And if you analyze things with that assumption, you go, oh yeah, 90% of the time, whatever direction we're going in is going to turn out to be a bad thing. And if you had malls now, people would just loot the malls these days, so people get things delivered, and soon communities will probably start building gates to protect themselves and have walls with barbed wire like in Latin American countries, because if they can't loot the malls or the shops and you get things delivered, well, then the next step is just looting the delivery trucks like they do in Oakland with the trains, or obviously doing home invasions. So are we going to move on to like fortified city states, go back 1,000 years? So I was flipping through a bit of Jay and Silent Bob after I saw Clerks, and there are themes in this movie that are anachronistic in current year because they've been done to death for the past 30 years. Having Carrie Fisher play a nun was only sort of okay decades ago, but nowadays it's been endless anti-Christian themes and obviously ignoring Jews and Muslims. And I mean, maybe now I guess you can go after Hindus. And the country is farther removed from Christianity than it was 20 and 30 years ago. Jokes only work in context. When the country is in a more positive place, the humor is different in what they can lampoon. And the problem is the people in Hollywood are so wealthy that they are completely removed from what the rest of the country is going through. It's why you're going to see Hollywood continue to collapse, and that's an awesome thing. Big movies require the audience to be on the same page, and it doesn't happen as much anymore as the country gets more diverse. People don't understand cultural references because the people are so different from each other. They have nothing in common. They're just a collection of strangers. It's why humor is getting dumber and less subtle. Movies that were made pre-1970 are impossible now because the audience is simply too stupid, distracted, and diverse. There's a scene in Jay and Silent Bob Part 2 where they're driving around and they're in a field and the clan is drinking beer or something stupid. And I saw that, and that scene was 40 years too late to be relevant, but I didn't get upset about it because Smith included some stuff against Muslims that was something that nobody else would have the balls to touch that kind of joke. He pretty much nuked him from orbit, and that's fair. Like if you're going to go after one group, you can't get offended when they go after your sacred cows. So somebody pointed out the concept about a frozen pop culture. I know there's a better term for it. I forget what it's called. It's like the death of pop culture or something like that. And I heard that and I keep thinking about that. I think, oh, that feels like that's something real and not enough people are talking. Here's how it works. When it feels like there's something real out there, but then there's a suspicious lack of communication about it, then there's probably a politically correct issue, some kind of elephant in the room with it. And then once you start investigating it, and you go, I think I found the invisible elephant. So the thing is, you can see themes in films are being recycled with reboots, prequels, and remakes with race and sex swaps. If you haven't noticed, new stories are not being told, or at least not like they used to be. Consider the time period of about the beginning of Hollywood. I would say when they went to sound, when they went to the talkies, they started to be when you can go to the theater and not have to read the boards. So from that time period up to the 60s, you could say that was roughly the peak of Hollywood storytelling, which, keep in mind, isn't Shakespeare. I'm not saying it is, but they did some things well, probably because the country was a different and obviously much better place. I mean, you can go back and watch those old movies for yourself. They're like made on an alien planet where you look at these movies, you're like, wait a minute, these movies made in America for American audience, and then you look around, you're like, I get it now. Then you take the 1970s to about 2000 to 2010 at the latest, and that was a time of fun, stupid, mostly nonsense, but they were great in their own way, but different from what was pre-1960s and the level of complexity of thought. So this is what was big for for Generation X, which is what the Clerks audience was, because the characters in this movie were supposed to be about 2021, and they and Kevin Smith were influenced by Star Wars and that generation of films and Marvel and DC Comics. Those characters are mentioned throughout Smith's movies. So all the stuff that influenced these characters, what's the equivalent if you did a Clerks in 2025 type of film? It's the dead pop culture theory. And my theory is it's because the demographics have dropped below a critical threshold for sufficient social cohesion to make sense, because organic stories require free speech and are fiercely nationalist. Maintaining the tribe and your way of life, that's been a theme for a long time. It's like, well, what are you fighting for? And nobody is ever seriously believing they're fighting for civic nationalism or for raise the Google flag versus the Bank of America flag. It's like, well, everyone's just a hired gun. There's no spirit, there's no soul to those movies or comics or any kind of story. There's no soul. Like, the core of all these things are stories, and that's why I think you're going to see the continued shrinking of anything in the pop culture, because everything is just not organic. It's all propaganda. And somewhere in the 70s, Hollywood detached from reality and started going mask off with their globalist propaganda. A lot of things happened in that period. Hart Celler in, I think, 65. Then in 71, the gold standard. They decided to go off the gold standard, which is like the paper is supposed to represent something. And then it switched from like silver and gold, silver certificates, to representing the full faith and credit of the treasury. You're like, oh, this isn't a good sign. No, it's not. So now you have a very unstable situation where inflation can skyrocket even faster than it was, and the wealth disparity goes to the extreme, where the top 1% is getting ultra wealthy, and everyone else becomes a nation enslaved to central banks and such things. And nobody, usury, but I didn't want to mispronounce it and think I was speaking of bears. And nobody questions why we don't fix the currency and destroy the Federal Reserve. Well, there's one guy who questions it quite a bit. One frail old man who's got an Odyssey and Rumble channel that does live streams talking about the Federal Reserve. Perhaps you've heard of him. And have the country handle its own money, because people who ask those questions usually have permanent accidents. And I mean, the worst he had was a stroke. Anyway, this frozen creativity thing has caught my attention. Things seem to peak in the 80s. Not in terms of quality. I'm not saying that. I know those movies were silly, as most movies are. But in terms of silly movies that click with the audience for some mindless entertainment, we're not saying Jaws or the indie series or Star Wars, Goonies, Gremlins, or Airplane, what a classic. We're not saying that that is high art, but they can't make films like that even today. You would think you have every tool available to you, and that's the thing, is they do have every tool available. So, like, nobody's complaining about the technical aspects of the film. It's just the political propaganda that you see in film. Now, Disney owns half of those IPs, but are committed to race swapping them, and nobody is watching. I think it has to do with the country's demographics are changing so fast that movies are being marketed to a country of strangers, because it's not a country anymore. It's just kind of a commercial zone to extract resources from the cattle debt slaves. How do you make a Clerks in this environment? If you have two guys running the store, half the people coming in wouldn't speak the language, and the other half would probably loot the store. The odds of these 20-year-old characters getting married, buying a house, having 5 kids is almost non-existent, especially now that Elon and Trump want to replace them with visa holders who will work for half. Bernie Sanders comes to their defense. A lighthearted movie like Clerks works in 1994, but it doesn't work today because the country is legitimately never going to recover. Sorry for that black pill. The social cohesion is gone. And when people try to create a stable society, they just get replaced with cheaper workers who, after a few generations, get depressed, and they themselves get replaced with new people. And what happens is Tucker Carlson had a comment about this. People come to the country, and he was saying they're just not replacing people of European descent. They're replacing everyone. And I think some of our guys took that wrong. He's right about that, because people come in and the birth rates collapse because they get exposed to American Weimar America, where it's woke feminism, globalist propaganda endlessly, and it's just this black hole of depression over people. And then they also they get exposed to American inflation where they live here, but then they have to pay American bills, and they realize like, oh, it's not the 1950s. They're not going to have the American dream on average like they kind of expected. So their birth rates collapse. So then they just get replaced with new people. So Carlson was right about that. The country is just a machine that consumes souls and lowers birth rates, and the politicians are not concerned about fixing it. They simply want to replace the people with new people. Bernie Sanders, he definitely hates European Americans. He had a line about something about white people don't know what it's like to suffer, and that was like he said that without thinking because he hates us so deeply, and we heard that, and we started thinking back to our history of suffering and blood, sweat, and tears. And you look at him and you're like, you'll never see him the same again. You'll just see him as just a venomous, disgusting animal. But even he right now is farther to the right than Trump and Musk. Bernie would be okay with just replacing white people, but the country isn't European anymore. So Bernie had to stick up for Americans by mentioning that the country should train its own people instead of replacing him. And not a whole lot of leftists got on board that because they vaguely feel it's not politically correct. It's like, well, if you don't have a nation that protects its own people, then you don't have anything. You just have a commercial zone. But the left can't say anything because they're scared of the farther left. Anyway, could Clerks be made today? No, but it should be. People should start making movies like this. They're not. Don't get me wrong. They're not. There's no. You look at Hollywood and go, oh, it's over with Hollywood. Yeah, there's going to be. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be ups and downs. Like you'll see a Barbie pops back up and it makes it $1.5 billion. There'll be stuff like that connects with people. But even that, like Barbie's not a movie that really connected with women. It 5 years from now, nobody's going to be mentioning lines from. I don't think people are even remember lines from Barbie now. It was just, I think at the time there was nothing else out there, and there was nothing else for a long time, and it connected with people. But generally, like you're going to see this trend continue to go downward. And the big tell will be when the Disney Star Wars, who's that? The Daisy Ridley movie comes out. To see how that does, if that signals, if it's a massive hit and it signals, and if it's a good movie, like it legitimately might be a good movie. I'm not saying that's not impossible. Like they do know how to make good movies, they just choose not to. If that was a big hit, then that would probably see a change in direction of Disney. But I kind of don't think it. I kind of don't think it would be, because to be a big hit means they have to dial back the woke, and that's just not what Disney's in business for. And if it's a big bomb, then that's going to be interesting, because then that would feel like the final straw for, at least for Star Wars, and a very, very dangerous red flag for Disney as a whole. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. See you guys all next episode.